Hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's good to be with you on this Wednesday, December 8th. Here is some of what we're talking about tonight. More than half of the Americans now in the hospital for COVID live in just 6 states. The Omicron variant continues to make headlines, but the Delta variant is still making people very sick. We will show you what's happening in those 6 states and share some of what you're seeing where you live. Then,
what your company did was to increase your marketing budget to try to woo more teens. Our kids aren't cash cows.
The head of Instagram faces questions on Capitol Hill about the app's impact on teenagers. Also, Starbucks workers in upstate New York want to form the company's first union. We'll take you there. And remember the statue of Robert E. Lee in Charlottesville? This one? The city says it's going to be on public display again in a very different way. Well, if you spent any time with us online, you know what story we're beginning with tonight. It was kind of a no-brainer. It was by far the most read story on NBCnews.com for much of the day. It's about the recent rise in Americans hospitalized by COVID. Just 6 states are responsible for more than half of the new hospitalizations between November 10th and December 5th. You can see them right here: Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, New York, and Illinois. And these states are in the Northeast and Midwest, where the colder weather is forcing people indoors and presumably closer together. Now, of the 6 states, Michigan is perhaps faring the worst. There has been more than a 13 percentage point increase in hospital beds for COVID patients there. Yesterday, doctors in southwestern Michigan talked about how bad things have gotten.
This past month has been the most challenging of the pandemic for our healthcare teams. We've seen three of the last 4 weeks have had the highest number of cases for hospitalization since early 2020.
We need your help. This affects the entire community's health. It affects your individual health. It affects your family's health.
In New York, the hospitals are so overcrowded that Governor Kathy Hochul is ordering some scheduled surgeries to be canceled.
Hospitals that have less than 10% capacity have to cease elective surgeries until at least January 15th, unless they're able to get those numbers higher, their capacity higher. There's probably over 50-some hospitals that meet that criteria.
Healthcare providers can attest how packed their hospitals are. Listen to this doctor in Pennsylvania.
Right now, our biggest challenge, and it is a very big one, is hospital capacity. A nationwide staffing shortage makes the situation even more challenging.
Another doctor in Indiana says the majority of the patients he's seeing have yet to get the vaccine. Quote, "There are still a lot of unvaccinated people in our population, and they're the ones that are coming down with the super contagious Delta virus that's causing them to get sick enough to need to be in the hospital," unquote. In Ohio, one healthcare worker said that ambulances sometimes have to wait 2 to 3 hours to deliver non-emergency patients. Reason being, there are already as many as 50 people waiting for beds. And Illinois reported 78 deaths on Tuesday. That was the state's highest one-day total since February. We could go on and on with more of these stories, but let's hear from a few doctors who are on the front lines. Joining us now are Dr. Stella Saffo, an internal medicine physician here in New York. She's also the founder of Just Equity for Health. And Dr. Rob Davison is an ER physician in Western Michigan. He's the executive director of the Committee to Protect Healthcare. Good to see you both, and I wonder, Dr. Saffo, if I could start with you. Actually, I'll ask both of you the same question to begin, but how are y'all doing? I can't imagine what it's like to be a healthcare provider right now. Dr. Saffo, how are you and your colleagues doing right now? Y'all doing all right?
Everyone is tired. You know, we've seen this happen over and over, and I think as the numbers are going up, there's a real concern that this is just the latest and what's going to continue to repeat going forward. I work primarily in the outpatient setting, so I am lucky in that, unlike my colleague who's on, I'm not necessarily seeing quite as much of the acute illness, but even my patients that are coming in the outpatient, they're suffering from, symptoms from long COVID, from having had COVID before and not having chronic illness from it. And so we are tired as healthcare workers, and we're asking everyone to do their part by masking, staying away from big crowds and getting vaccinated and boosted if they haven't been.
Dr. Davidson, what about you and your colleagues? How are y'all doing?
Well, two things, right? The first that I've noticed is people are rallying. That I think has been incredible. The teamwork has been amazing. Hospitalists coming down to the emergency department where I work to see patients. I've worked in a couple of ICU shifts in the past few weeks because they have expanded their ICU capacity at one of our hospitals threefold since from their baseline. But the other thing that is a challenge is we're taking care of people who shouldn't be sitting in the emergency department for 12 hours, 24 hours. Had a patient this morning that I managed from about 1 a.m. to about 7 a.m. trying to get them an ICU bed somewhere in West Michigan, finally got them somewhere, but then was called back and said, well, we have to talk to the administrators because, based on their age, we're not sure if we're going to give them an ICU bed or if we need to kind of save it for somebody else. Eventually, the patient luckily got there, but, it's just unlike anything else I've ever seen before.
Are the patients, Dr. Saffo, that you're encountering who are kind of filling up the beds in your area, or do they come from a particular demographic? Like, can you paint us a picture? Do they tend to fall into certain kind of demographic or regional descriptors, or is it really a little bit of everybody?
I mean, according to the New York Department of Public Health data that's coming out, it's everyone, but it's predominantly those who are not vaccinated. What is happening that we're seeing in our city for sure is that those boroughs where we have folks that are more likely to be unvaccinated are also going to be having higher spikes of individuals that are being hospitalized. Those boroughs are places like the Bronx, Brooklyn. There are really incredible efforts that are happening to get everyone in those boroughs at least aware of their options to get vaccinated. But where you see that unvaccinated numbers are higher, you will also see in those local areas that people who are going into the hospitals are slightly higher in those areas compared to the areas that are more likely to be vaccinated. And we know in this country that does trend to younger people being less likely to be vaccinated, and it does trend to certain ethnic and racial groups being less likely to be vaccinated at this point as well.
Are we talking about the same racial and ethnic groups, Dr. Saffo, that we saw unvaccinated in the beginning of the pandemic? I mean, I remember there were parts of Brooklyn and Queens that tend to be majority black and brown, particularly where multiple languages are spoken, where the outbreaks within the city of New York tended to be higher than, say, in parts of Manhattan. Is it kind of the same problems in the same places?
It is, and it's part of the reason why so many of, I think, my colleagues and I have worked so hard, because the folks who have had the worst outcomes, the folks who have been the most likely to get COVID and had the worst outcomes from COVID are Black, Latinx, people of color communities. And some of those individuals are also the ones who have had either less access to the vaccines or have contemporary or historic mistrust of our healthcare system and have been slower to get vaccinated. And so you're going to see that these populations will be the ones that are even more impacted by this pandemic. I think this city, and certainly our healthcare workers and many of our hospitals, has done a pretty Herculean job of trying to reach these populations and get them protected. But it comes down to people feeling like they're talking to, trusted community messengers and feeling able to kind of move towards getting vaccinated. But, vaccinations are one of the best things we have in our toolkit. And my hope is that more folks will take it on as Omicron is becoming more and more of a challenge for us.
Dr. Davidson, the New York metro area and the state of Michigan are two very different kinds of places. Can you talk a little bit about what you have to do to deal with whatever the demographics of people are who seem to be filling up the hospitals across a state as big as Michigan? I mean, if you're dealing with people who are in Detroit and Ann Arbor and Grand Rapids and Lansing and the Upper Peninsula, it seems like it can rapidly become a logistical nightmare to get people the care they need, especially if the hospital where they live has filled up, but you got to put them somewhere.
Right. I mean, I think part of the issue where I am, we're in a very rural white area, highly conservative, highly Republican, and our vaccination rate in my county is about 42% overall. And so that is the biggest issue right now, is we have a lot of people who just don't trust what we're telling them, people who are arguing with nurses when we're giving them things like steroids for the COVID that they have because they're afraid we're trying to give them a vaccine, or claiming that we're trying to give them COVID by doing a test that's happened numerous times, and nurses are getting frustrated. But you're right, trying to get people shuttled around in a rural area to other hospitals. We have EMS systems that are routinely down a team at night, especially. They're driving around hours upon hours with patients in tow, people with COVID in their ambulance, trapped in a little steel box, trying to find a bed for them. And they aren't transferring people between the hours of 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. unless it's a time-sensitive priority, critical transport. And so those people are just getting stuck. And then when they do get transferred, we have a lot of people in rural areas that they've never been to the big city out here in West Michigan. So getting their families there, getting them back home when they hopefully get discharged, it's logistically just unbelievably hard. And again, it's been sustained. We've had about 5 weeks now of this wave that it just keeps going. It's like climbing a set of stairs. You plateau for a couple of days and then it goes up again. It's tough.
Can I just get your reaction also, Dr. Davidson, to something from Dr. Paul Offit of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia? Here's part of what he said yesterday to our colleagues on MSNBC. Watch.
I was actually on service last week at our hospital, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and we were seeing many children with this disease, children who not just came into the hospital, had to go to the intensive care unit, placed on ventilators, and I can tell you not one of those children was vaccinated, and often their parents weren't vaccinated. You see children struggling to breathe, you see children on ventilators, you see their parents crying. Knowing that this can all be prevented, it's just hard to watch.
Dr. Davidson, how do you deal with people who have gotten to the point where maybe their decisions have put them at higher risk for COVID by being unvaccinated, but you still have to treat them? Talk me through that conversation of what happens at the moment of care.
I'll be honest, I'll share a little bit. I've gotten some comments on Twitter. I did an op-ed today talking about all of this, and some people saying, well, just don't treat those people, send them home, give the beds to the vaccinated, save it, don't treat those. It's just not how I'm wired. It's not how we're wired. The people I work with, listening to Dr. Offit there, it sounds the same. We're frustrated with people who aren't getting vaccinated. We're frustrated with the situation. But in the moment, someone's laying there gasping for breath, especially a child. But in my case, we see a lot of more adults, and see young adults, people in their 20s and 30s who have no business being this sick. If they had just gotten vaccinated, they would be not sitting in front of you. But they are. And so the empathy well is getting challenging at times. I say, we're tapping that empathy well. Someday it's going to run out. It hasn't yet. It hasn't for me. It hasn't for so many of my colleagues, nurses, docs, techs, paramedics. We were trained to do this. We can continue to do this. A lot of us are looking down the road a year or two thinking, I wonder how long I'm going to do this. But, as long as I'm in it, as long as we're in it, we're going to be there for the patients who come in, irrespective of the choices they made, before they got to us.
Dr. Saffo, I know my time with you too is brief, but what do you say to your colleagues in those moments where the empathy well begins to run dry? Like, how do you talk to one another to just get yourselves through another workday?
I think Dr. Davidson really explained it well. When you have a person in front of you who is unwell, you can't think of anything but helping them to get better. I will also say that I think it's important that we don't paint with brush strokes the population of those who are not vaccinated. Yes, there are those who are, staunch conservatives that may believe in conspiracy theories or believe that, the vaccines are out to get them or whatever it is that folks may believe. But there are also many individuals who just want to wait, who just want a little bit more time to understand the impact of these vaccines. Or I know I've seen many individuals who don't have a trusted healthcare worker or other individual that they can talk to and ask questions to, so they don't have the information that they need to get vaccinated. And then other individuals who would like to, and for different reasons, cannot access the vaccines. These individuals shouldn't not have care because we've judged them as, making bad choices. I think that empathy well absolutely cannot run out, and we have to just hold on to that for all of us as we head into this latest wave.
Let me remind anybody who's watching right now, if you haven't been vaccinated yet and you need help getting that information, we've got a site that's got all the information you need. It's planyourvaccine.com. Remember, not a soul needs to know that you've been vaccinated. You can do it privately, quietly, just between you and your doctor. It doesn't have to be a political statement. It's between you and your doctor. Do it on your own time in your own way. Planyourvaccine.com. Dr. Stella Saffo and Dr. Rob Davidson, I really appreciate you both making time for us tonight. Stay safe, and thank you both very much. This is more bad news after nearly 2 years of this pandemic, and you can hear how hard it is for frontline healthcare workers to deal with. Well, up next, we'll get the latest on the fight against COVID, including a little bit of relief over the Omicron variant. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Let's continue now with COVID and a bit of good news on the fight against the pandemic. The FDA has given emergency use authorization to a medication for people with weaker immune systems. It's an injectable antibody treatment, but it's not a vaccine. It's designed to help prevent COVID in people who cannot get a vaccine or whose bodies do not really respond to them. Meanwhile, today, Pfizer announced that 3 doses of its vaccine show significant protection against Omicron. The company says that 2 doses might not be enough to take on the new strain. Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla says if you get their booster, you should be in good shape.
A third dose, to make it clear for your audience, 3 doses against Omicron are almost equivalent to the 2 doses effectiveness we had against the wild type, the original variant. These are very good news.
By our count, more than half of Americans are choosing Pfizer for their booster dose. Now, since the Omicron variant emerged, more Americans are getting vaccinated. As of today, around 200 million of us are now fully vaccinated. That is more than 60% of the population. Dr. Stella Saffo, an internal medicine physician here in New York, is back with us. And Dr. Saffo, I wonder what your sense is of, for example, or for starters, this new pre-exposure prophylaxis drug, the technical term for it, from AstraZeneca, the medication for people who cannot get the vaccine. How big of a gap do you think that will help to close in terms of getting more people protected?
So it is an interesting development. I think anything that we add to our toolkit that helps us to fight COVID is something to celebrate. But the AstraZeneca development is one that is new, that still needs to be tested. And so we have some more time to go before we know what it will look like, how it will be priced, who will be available to. In the meantime, COVID isn't slowing down. And so there's this real conversation that needs to happen in public health of what can we do now that'll keep us protected and safe, among which is the vaccine, but also among which are mask mandates, that'll keep people safe while we also come up with other therapies to reduce your risk if you can't get the vaccines for some reason, or God forbid, if you do get sick. So whenever I hear about these new developments, I always say that's great, but we know what works, and let's stick with what works while we wait for them to become fully fleshed out.
Let me share some of the stories that some of you shared with us about what you're seeing where you live. Twitter user @AbbyFrick tweeted, here in Indiana, seeing lots of unvaccinated people. At the grocery store yesterday, I'd say about 20% of the people, customers and employees, were masked. Son's preschool class is quarantined, and our dentist canceled a cleaning yesterday because he has COVID. Twitter user @BrainsBrawnMD wrote, it's definitely worse in southwestern Pennsylvania. I work at a tertiary referral hospital, and we are getting many cases from my rural portions of the state with limited critical care beds. I just intubated another COVID patient a few minutes ago. Dr. Saffo, I wonder if we could stick with this one for a minute, not only because this person is a friend of mine who works at a hospital in southwestern Pennsylvania, but also I think there's this perception among some people that even if you're not vaccinated and you don't, say, take this AstraZeneca pill, that there's something they can do for you in the hospital, right? There's some kind of a treatment, monoclonal antibodies, it'll be fine. My natural immunity may or may not be enough, but at least if I get hospitalized, there's still something they can do. Can you speak to that supposition? Is that true?
So you should know that in medicine, no doctor that is sane would ever recommend that you actually get a disease if we can prevent the disease. And that is because the things that cause disease, bacteria, viruses, all of these pathogens that cause disease, oftentimes in the human body, they will do some damage before we can reverse it and fix it. And so if you are gambling on the medical system being so amazing that it saves you, you could unfortunately be among the individuals, over 790,000 individuals who have died from COVID, or God forbid, the numbers that we don't even know how many who now have side effects from COVID and have long COVID symptoms. And so it's a gamble. Yes, you could have COVID and be fine. Yes, you could have COVID and be hospitalized and get the best treatments and be fine. Or you could have COVID and die. And so it's a real question of, do you want to play with the highest stakes thing that you have, which is your life? I think most people would say no. And it's why we say, well, then don't get COVID at all. That is the best way to go.
Dr. Safo, I appreciate you making a little bit more time for us to talk through what's going on where you live and also what's going on nationwide. Again, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We are shifting next to Starbucks. Nearly 100 workers in upstate New York are deciding whether to unionize. What this could mean for the coffee chain and for the restaurant industry. NBC's Dasha Burns joins us live with her reporting on that when we come back. Let's go to Buffalo, New York now. A unionization battle is brewing, so to speak, at Starbucks. Today, workers at 3 Starbucks locations voted on whether to join the Workers United Union. At the moment, no corporate-run Starbucks location in the U.S. is unionized. This year, America has seen a number of union drives and strikes in a number of industries: Hollywood, healthcare, agriculture, food, and more. So what prompted this movement, and what's going on in Buffalo now? NBC's Dasha Burns has the story.
Jazz Brissack is a 24-year-old Starbucks barista.
So I'm one of the openers at my store, so getting up at 4:30 is pretty standard. Make sure everything's ready for the day, feed the cats, make sure they have water.
She works at an unassuming Starbucks store in Buffalo, New York.
I love working at Starbucks. Some of the most amazing people I've ever met work at the store with me.
This young service worker and this coffee shop could make history this week. Jazz has become an unlikely leader of an effort to create the first unionized corporate Starbucks stores in the country. Employees at 3 Starbucks stores in the Buffalo area are now voting on whether or not to form a union.
This old Model T factory is now home to the Starbucks unionization effort here in Buffalo. And inside, the clock is ticking for these organizers.
Jazz and her fellow barista, 37-year-old Michelle Eisen, are here on their off hours to help quarterback the final moments of the campaign.
Well, Starbucks historically has been viewed as a really great place to work, a lot of benefits. Why does Starbucks need a union?
When I started with them in 2010, that's what I came into. I really do feel like they were that company. And in the last 4 or 5 years, those little kind of perks have slowly kind of been pulled away. Like we've seen the benefits packages, we've seen those costs go up and the benefits go down. And I've got partners who can't pay their rent and put groceries in their fridge at the same time.
Why now?
You're seeing people who were forced to work through some pretty intense, awful conditions and realizing that these corporations made billions of dollars off the backs of our labor in the middle of a global pandemic, and we've reaped little to no benefits from that.
After they started organizing, Jazz and Michelle say Starbucks flooded Buffalo area stores with managers from other parts of the country. A company spokesperson told NBC News the personnel are there independent of the union vote to help fill staffing gaps, improve how stores function, and help with training at request of employees.
We had support managers from all over the country. That's what Starbucks calls them, support managers. The quotes are necessary because they're not really here to support us. In fact, they're here solely to come into our store, make sure that there's not any time that there's not management watching. We used to talk about the union at work. We were signing up people, talking about organizing as we were making drinks.
When did you start noticing these new people coming in, these support managers?
Within a week of us filing, I believe. Rosanne Williams, who is the president of Starbucks North America, she oversees, to the best of my knowledge, corporate Starbucks in North America, came into town, started holding active listening sessions. That's what they call them.
Had she been to town before?
I've never seen anyone higher than a regional director in Buffalo, let alone anyone to the level that she's at. She pops into stores whenever she feels like it, grabs a bucket of ice, takes out a trash bag.
A Starbucks spokesperson said, "We categorically deny any claims of surveillance, union busting, or anything of the sort," adding that it is normal for executives like Rosanne Williams to visit stores when they hear Starbucks partners, the company's term for employees, are unhappy. Back in the union war room, the effort that started among a few baristas has taken on a national significance. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez met with organizers to offer her support, and Senator Bernie Sanders hosted a live stream to showcase the movement.
Many of Starbucks employees are younger people who come from a generation that has really struggled economically and through no fault of their own now has a lower standard of living than their parents.
With ballots being counted Thursday, Michelle and Jazz are making big plans.
We win on Thursday. We have the first unionized Starbucks in the United States of America, and then we get Starbucks to the bargaining table and negotiate the best contract that the service industry has ever seen. I mean, that's the goal.
Dasha Burns joins us now, and I wonder what this might mean for Starbucks more broadly. First of all, has the company responded to all of this, to any of your questions?
Yeah, so they did say that they categorically deny any claims of surveillance or union busting, and they've put out messages to the employees saying that they are doing what they can to help the situation, to ensure that there's more training, to improve benefits, to listen, basically, to what these folks are saying.
We've been listening to you in terms of your experiences with unions and got some mixed report. Yeah. Granted, this is normal. Like, unions are a reflection of the people within them. Right. And I don't think anyone believes that they're all good, all bad. But we got some mixed stories from you about your experiences with unions. One viewer tweeted, "My father works as a security guard, and he and his other coworkers are considered independent contractors. Union meetings help them get the same health insurance and benefits full-time employees of the company that hires them. It was such a huge positive for him and the other security guards. I'm interested in hearing from employers who've been required to make changes like that and what it takes to do it." Another viewer wrote, "My friend's husband worked for the city school district. His union for maintenance decided not to pitch in to state disability. When he got cancer, he had no coverage for that, so no income. Shortly after, he had to do early retirement to access money. Then they voted to start it." Dasha, clearly mixed opinions from our viewers about the value of unions. Are the folks you talked to in Buffalo mixed on whether they want a union as well?
Well, look, as you mentioned, every union is different, right? And there are some sectors that have a long history with unions, some that don't. The service sector is actually one that is fairly new to this type of labor movement. One of the union organizers we spoke with said that what these people are doing in the service sector is akin to what their great-grandparents did with manufacturing in the 30s and 40s. But you're right, not everyone is on board, and we did talk to some anti-union Starbucks workers who say that, look, Starbucks is already one of the few companies that provides health benefits for part-time workers. They've historically been a great place to work. The wages are decent, and they are worried that this union battle will actually harm the relationship between workers and baristas.
Expand on that a little bit in terms of, the generational circumstances that bring about pushes for unionization. What about COVID? I mean, is part of this a function of just the fact that everyone's rethinking their jobs during this pandemic and their relationship to their employers?
Well, that's a great question, because I do think that this is a special moment. I asked why now, why is this happening right now? And the pro-union workers that I talked to say that, look, this is a time when suddenly these service jobs that were looked at as disposable for a long time are no longer disposable. In fact, they were classified as essential during the pandemic. And so they want to use that and to leverage that to say, look, you relied on us through this time. You made record profits over the last year when so many people were struggling through this period. And we want to reap some of the benefits of that and be recognized for the work that we did and the way we did step up in a time when things were tough.
So suppose that this vote for unionization goes the way of unionization. What are some of the changes, the top line things, benefits changes that the workers who support this are looking for?
Well, one of the big things is simply a seat at the table. They want to make sure that they can have their voices heard, and they feel like the union is the best tool for that. So they're looking at, health benefits, they're looking at better wages, and they're looking at what happened during the course of the pandemic and seeing that, there were some things that didn't go exactly right. They weren't treated as well as they wanted to be. They were risking their health and safety, and they they didn't have a say in how those policies should be implemented. And so they're looking to make sure that they have a space and a voice to, in the future, when things come up, be able to say, hey, this is how we want things to go.
From talking to them, and I know I got to let you go in a second, but just from talking to them, did you get the sense that they were confident about this effort, that they were nervous about this effort? It feels like, having covered a lot of these labor stories over the last few years, some of them feel like, well, maybe we can organize, and others are like, oh, we're organized already. We just need to make it official.
Yeah, they're pretty confident. You never know, and as you heard in that story there, the workers do feel that Starbucks has done a lot to sort of quiet down and tamp down this movement. But in Buffalo, part of the seed that was planted early on is there was a coffee chain that unionized, Spot Coffee, it's another chain in Buffalo, that unionized a couple of years ago. And that sort of planted the seed that, hey, maybe we can do this. And so they stepped up and started this movement. And they're thinking that, hey, if we can do this here, this might set a precedent for other Starbucks and other folks in the union, in the service sector to do this too.
It's a fascinating story. I'm always fascinated by these efforts to organize. It'll be interesting to see how this one goes.
See what happens tomorrow.
Exactly. Tomorrow when the votes are tallied, and then we'll see where it goes from there.
That's
NBC's
right.
Dasha Burns, thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
We have an update to our conversation tonight about COVID. We were talking about measures that are being taken to protect folks from the pandemic. Well, tonight, one of them faces a little bit of pushback from the Senate on Capitol Hill, a measure to defund and repeal the Biden administration's private sector vaccine mandate has passed the Senate. That means 52 senators have voted to reverse that mandate. This would apply to private sector businesses with 100 employees or more. All 50 Republicans voted for this. This only needed a simple majority. 2 Democrats joined the Republicans, John Tester of Montana and Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Now the resolution goes over to the House. It seems unlikely to pass the House because the House Democratic leadership is probably not even going to bring this up for a vote. But this is a somewhat symbolic measure, a way of sending a message in terms of how the Republican members and at least 2 Democrats in the Senate feel about this mandate. Again, this was a mandate on private sector businesses with 100 employees or more, a measure to bring that down, passed in the Senate. We'll see what it turns into in the House. We'll keep an eye on that story for you tomorrow as well. Now, throughout this pandemic, many of us were glued to our phones, many of us scrolling endlessly through Instagram. Well, the debate continues over the safety of this app, especially for teens. We'll take you inside a Senate hearing today where lawmakers tried to put pressure on the company's CEO.
Your company viewed losing teen users as a, quote, existential threat, whereas parents are viewing their kids' addictions to your product and other products as an existential threat to their families. Your company viewed losing teen users as a, quote, existential threat.
Instagram is addictive.
Our kids aren't cash cows.
Do you prohibit known sex offenders from creating Instagram accounts?
You better tell the truth. You're under oath.
That's just some of what we heard during a Senate hearing today. Lawmakers sounded off on the head of Instagram, Adam Mosseri. At issue, whether the app is good for teenagers and what the company is doing to reduce harm. Mr. Mosseri maintained his argument that social media can be a positive force in the lives of teens. He also endorsed letting an industry group set best practices on 3 key issues.
How to verify age, how to build age-appropriate experiences, and how to build parental controls. The body should receive input from civil society, from parents, and from regulators. The standards need to be high, and the protections universal. But I want to assure you that we do have the same goal. We all want teens to be safe online. The internet isn't going away.
A number of Silicon Valley's top execs have testified this year and gotten a similarly intense reception. But the last few months have heated up significantly. Yesterday, the nonprofit group Tech Transparency Project released an investigation. It claims that teenagers can easily find and purchase illegal drugs through Instagram. apparently with just 2 clicks. The group says that minors could search drug-related hashtags and connect to the accounts of dealers. Instagram's parent company, Meta, says it prohibits drug sales and is constantly removing drug-related content. Before this report came an investigative series by the Wall Street Journal. The Facebook Files dug into a trove of leaked internal documents from Facebook. Instagram used to be owned by Facebook before the parent company renamed itself Meta. The documents suggest that company researchers knew that Instagram was toxic for teenage girls. Yesterday, one day before Adam Mosseri's testimony, Instagram announced it would make a number of updates aimed at teen safety. Let's dig deeper into today's hearing with NBC technology correspondent Jake Ward. Hey, Jake.
Joshua, it was a tense day for Adam Mosseri in his first appearance as Instagram CEO in front of Congress. This committee was not ready to hear his talk about his platform not being addictive, that the research internally at the company is not as damning as the Facebook papers seem to have suggested. All of that seemed to have fallen on deaf ears. We had senators from both sides of the aisle, people who cannot agree on some of the most fundamental facts of human life, totally in lockstep about the need to turn over more data from inside Instagram to independent third-party researchers, talking openly about their concerns that their children, their grandchildren, the families of their constituents are in danger from this platform as it pushes them toward darker and darker content. And the idea that the opacity of this platform, not being able to see inside it, how it works, is a tremendous danger to people's, not just the logistics of their lives, but their mental health, the inside stuff that makes our brains what they are. All of that really on stark display today. In addition, Adam Mosseri did manage to mention a number of new steps that his company has taken. Facebook and Meta, its parent company, announcing that Instagram will be instituting limits on how adults and teenagers can communicate, take a break systems that tell you to stop doom scrolling, and systems that will give parents new amounts of control. But to see Adam Mosseri literally saying, no, I don't believe it is addictive, and disputing the idea that building an under 13 Instagram would be a problem. Instead, he says it would be a solution to a problem. Just there was a fundamentally different take on all of this. And that is why one senator said, at this point, as parents and as a company, we think we are at diametrically opposite viewpoints here. So definitely a day not of coming together over this subject, but one in which the Instagram CEO was thoroughly grilled. Joshua?
Thank you, Jake. That's NBC's Jake Ward reporting from San Francisco. Let's continue now with Jim Steyer. He's the CEO of Common Sense Media, a nonprofit that advocates safe environments for children in the digital world. Mr. Steyer, welcome to the program.
Good to see you, Joshua.
I want to take on 2 arguments that I hear a lot as it comes to social media. The parental responsibility piece, and then the pessimistic, there's no way out of this piece. Let's start with the parental responsibility piece that says parents need to know what their kids are doing. I don't care if it's Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or TikTok or whatever is coming around the corner. It's your job as a parent to know. It's your job as a parent to understand it. You need to know what the parental controls are. And if your kid is falling down a rabbit hole in Instagram, that's not the company's fault. At the end of the day, mom, dad, it's on you. What would you say to that?
Well, I'm the parent of 4, and I run the biggest kids media organization in the world that has well over 100 million parents who use it. And I would agree parents have a role in this. But it's almost a joke to say that Facebook and Instagram, which is what we're talking about here, the biggest platforms in the world, don't have a responsibility to the kids and teens on the platform. And that's why Adam Mosseri got grilled today, Joshua. And he did get grilled, and he should have been grilled by Amy Klobuchar and Dick Blumenthal and others. Because fundamentally, this is a day of reckoning for Instagram. They have intentionally designed, because of the business model of Instagram, an attention-grabbing, sort of an arms race for attention platform that does addict your children. That's why all the senators laughed when Adam Mosseri said, well, it's not really addictive. Come on, give me a break. Rather than take a break, give me a break when you hear that. So Joshua, parents have a role, and I run the biggest parents organization exists in the media space, where we give information not just about Instagram and Facebook, but every movie, TV, and video game. But at the end of the day, Congress which, by the way, has been missing in action for 15 years on these issues, better step up and regulate these platforms, starting with Instagram. No question.
Let me take the other side of it in terms of just the difficulty of dealing with this. There was an exchange between Mr. Mosseri and Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, Republican senator, related to JoJo Siwa, who is an 18-year-old YouTube star. There was a recent Q&A with Mr. Mosseri in which JoJo Siwa told him that she had been on Instagram since she was 8 years old. And Mosseri responded, "I don't want to hear it," kind of jokingly. Here is part of the exchange between Adam Mosseri and Senator Blackburn. Watch.
At that moment, when you responded to her that you did not want to know, why didn't you use that as a teaching moment?
Senator, I would say it was a missed opportunity.
Indeed, it was a missed opportunity, and it sends the wrong message. This is a part of our frustration with you, with Instagram, and with these platforms.
Perhaps a missed opportunity, but here's the cynical point of view.
Okay.
It's too late. The bell is rung, the die is cast. She's been on for 10 years if she said she was on at 8 and now she's 18, and now she's a YouTube star.
Right.
So it's too late. There is no undoing the damage, arguable damage, that social media have done in general to kids, and there's nothing that could really be done to mitigate the power of the algorithms behind these social media apps. That's the cynical view. Do you share any of that view?
Okay, you can't undo it, Joshua. You cannot undo what passed, right? That's true for you and me, for my kids, for everybody. But going forward, you can completely change the dynamic, which is exactly what needs to happen here. You know, I saw Senator Blackburn yesterday, and the most important thing about her is she's a Republican leader. So to get the legislation you need, you're going to have to do this on a bipartisan basis. But you absolutely can change the algorithm and make them transparent. If you see Senator Blumenthal, Senator Blackburn, Senator Klobuchar, they have the power to pass legislation that would fundamentally change both the transparency of and the makeup of the algorithms that are currently used on Instagram and other platforms, by the way. So you can't undo the past. And so that YouTube star is going to be that YouTube star and was on their page. But it's complete baloney to say that going forward, you can't have age verification. You can't make it only for people over 13 and up, or if you said 16 and up, which might be a more reasonable limit. So this is a historic opportunity to turn the tide. And part of it is because of the Facebook whistleblower revelations from Francis Haugen, and finally Congress paying attention. But Congress has to act on a bipartisan basis, which is so important that you're showing the senators, because it's up to them to get their act together on a bipartisan basis and protect America's kids and families and regulate these guys.
Well, in the meantime, in our last few seconds, for parents who are struggling with what to do about their kids on Instagram or social media in general right now, what is your one biggest tip for any parent who's concerned about this, the one thing that they need to hear right now the most before we go?
2, have a conversation on an ongoing basis about what your kid is doing on that platform. And 2, set really serious time limits and make sure they're over the age of 13. Those are 3.
I think ultimately that what I hear from all 3 of those things is to be in conversation with your kids. If your kids have more conversation with Instagram than you have with your kids about Instagram, then maybe that's a balance that needs to shift. Jim Steyer, CEO of Common Sense Media. Mr. Steyer, appreciate you making time. Thank you very much. Remember that Confederate statue in Charlottesville, Virginia, the one of Robert E. Lee? It was at the center of that deadly rally in 2017. Well, now, Charlottesville is preparing to turn this symbol of white supremacy into a monument to black history. We'll explain before we go. What should we do with symbols of white supremacy, like Confederate statues? Replace them, destroy them, alter them to tell a more complete story, leave them as they are? Cities across the country are answering this question case by case, including Charlottesville, Virginia. And this statue got the attention of the world in 2017. The monument honors Civil War General Robert E. Lee. He led the Confederate Army and negotiated its surrender in 1865. The statue became the focal point of violence between white nationalists and counter-protesters at the Unite the Right rally. A young activist, Heather Heyer, was killed, and last month a jury awarded $25 million to 9 people who were injured. Historians will tell you that Robert E. Lee never wanted monuments to himself or to the war. He wanted to live a quiet life and let the country move on. now he may finally get his wish, at least in Charlottesville. The city just announced that this statue will be handed over to a Black History Center. And joining us now to lay out the plan, joining us by phone, is Dr. Andrea Douglas, the executive director of the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center in Charlottesville, Virginia. Dr. Douglas, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, how are you all?
I'm well. Can you tell us briefly, once you get this statue, what are you going to do with it?
Well, our plan, entitled Swords into Plowshares, is to take the statue, melt it down, take the resulting materials, and then use it to transform that object into new artwork. Our intent is also to create a community engagement process where Charlottesville will have an opportunity to think about what its values are in terms of its 21st century values, in terms of what it means to live in Charlottesville, what kinds of objects we want in our public spaces, what kinds of expressions we want to make to those who visit the community about who we are and how we view ourselves as 21st century people. So how
did you come to the decision? Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Douglas, forgive me. I know our time is real short, but I'd love to know how you came to the decision about what to do with this statue. I'm sure there are plenty of people who would have wanted to just melt it and not make anything else of it, just kind of get rid of it altogether.
Well, I think that this is our goal is to create something out of and begin to have our community heal in some ways. I mean, something very tragic, as you described, occurred in our community. And it was very impactful post-2017. We began to really think about the kinds of inequities we live in and live with. And so it felt necessary to not just end the conversation there, but to find a place in a way that we could continue to talk and continue to find common ground. And so we believe that this process will get us to that place. By 2024, which is the 100th anniversary of the placement of the Lee statue in our community, we hope to really have a good sense of what it means to occupy public space and what kinds of things are appropriate for the kinds of activities that occur in those spaces today.
Right. Before I have to let you go, we did an NBC News Wall Street Journal poll that found people very split about whether to remove these statues. Somewhat in favor, but really quite split. To people who say that these statues should be preserved in some form in their original form, how would you respond to that?
I think that I would respond to it by saying that the moment that those statues were placed in any community in this country in the 1920s and the 1950s and the 1960s, they were meant to do harm. So they came out of commemorative spaces like cemeteries and moved into public spaces, and they were placed there to as symbols of white supremacy. And so, as under those conditions, that they should not be in our public spaces. They should not be allowed to sit in front of courtrooms. They should not be allowed to demarcate outlines of African-American communities as they did in Charlottesville. And so while we want to have a conversation about art, while we want to have a conversation about preservation, these particular objects are doing quite different work than aesthetic work, than historic work. We're not erasing anyone's history. We all have a very clear understanding of what the Civil War was, Paul's narrative is. We can't erase those things, but we can do something about our future and the kinds of values that we want to articulate in our public spaces, and that's what this project does.
Dr. Andrea Douglas, the executive director of the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center in Charlottesville, Virginia. We appreciate you making time for us. Thank you very much. And thank you for making time for us. Do come on back tomorrow, and please bring a friend. Follow us online for the latest on upcoming topics and guests. We're at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Leave us a voicemail, 888-575-2NBC, or email nowtonight@nbcnews.com. So until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.